Sayyid Asfar Hussain, and I'm the program manager at the National Incubation Center, Karachi. Today we are with an amazing panel and with a very interesting topic, which is built up towards our Investor Summit 2021. So basically, all startups need funding to scale, and it's very important for us and incubators around to make them investment ready, make these startups have better understanding of the requirements that investors have and how to make them the right sort of eligible startups for investors. So we have before this investor summit, we had an amazing interaction with and a partnership announcement with N2 Technologies. We have Neil Ashman of N2 Technology and today's panelist, Derek Watson of facilitates our startups to help them with their requirements and make them more investment ready. And we have another guest today. We have Lee McMahon, who's with Clara Technologies. It's a legal operating system and it helps startups as well as help them on the legal side. And we'll have an interesting panel discussion which will be led by Sana Shah, who's the outreach and community lead at NIC Karachi. So without further delay, I'll ask Sana to take this session forward and ask them questions and ask them key concerns and challenges and opportunities for startups and how to ready and what should they do to have them prepared for this major decision of their startup journey. So over to you, Sana, and welcome everyone.
Thank you so much, Asfar. So as Asfar introduced our partnership with N2 Technology and our built up session for Pakistan Investor Summit, where we help investors connect with our startups. So today is the very first session of this whole series, and we're very excited to have Derek, Lee, and Sidra with us. So let's just begin. My first question from all three of you is that how to find the right investor for a startup, and what should be the search criteria for any startup when it comes to looking for an investor. So anyone can go first, and then Derek? Yeah.
I'm happy to take this one. This is really what N2 does, and the problem that it's trying to solve in this marketplace. When it comes to finding those right investors, the problem for any startup is that identification process, and I'm sure Sidra can back me up on this. The amount of pitch decks that everybody gets and have to filter through to get those salient ones, to get that first 100 that actually fit the investors' preferences, so that they can actually start doing their diligence and boiling it down. And that's an ongoing problem. It has been for the best part of 20, 30 years. The way we look at it from this side is that first challenge that any startup has to go through is finding who are those investors in the right geography that can actually invest into where I am. What stage series am I at? What is that? What is the deal size? All of these things have to be ticked off, and then you have the industry you're in. And as we move into this new fourth industrial revolution that we're in, everything is changing around us. We can't just look at I'm an insurance company, I'm a financial. We're looking at a lot more. There's a lot a much wider bandwidth for startups to consider now, and that sort of boils down to the business type that they are. You know, are they a B2B, are they a B2C, etc. What technology they're actually using? You know, are they big data? Are they AI? All of these things have to be considered as well. And then finally getting down into, are you an e-commerce platform, or are you a fintech, a health tech, an ed tech? You know, all of these things now have to be answered. So going back when you're considering all of this and trying to find the right investor, that's a lot of data that you've actually got to sit down. And as an entrepreneur, you have a day job, and that day job is starting your fantastic company. And it shouldn't really be involved in hours and hours and hours going through Excel sheets trying to sort out a subjective list at the end of the day of investors that you might be able to approach. So that's really what has to be the hit list that you have to go through, and the problem that we're trying to solve at our end, to get it down to, for investors to get it down to that 100 list where they can start doing the right thing. So just to sum up, it's a awful job trying to find those right investors, and putting it out to all and sundry really won't help you at the same time. Voila.
And to add on to what Derek said, I believe that the startup or the founder should look into what the investor can offer beyond the capital investment. So whether they really understand your business model, and whether they are capable of committing to finance your startup, not just in the one in the one go, and whether they are capable to commit themselves for the the follow-up series as well.
Okay, Lee, anything you would like to add to this?
Yeah, just one other point from a legal perspective. It's really important to find investors who have quite a bit of experience in investing in startups, because you'll often see a lot of people who are interested in startups. They will be, there are a lot of time wasters who try to gather a lot of information by getting more and more of the due diligence or the VDR rooms from all the startups. But the problem you've got is if you deal with people that have not historically invested in startups, particularly early stage startups, you'll find yourself in a position of going down very long paths, wasting time. They will try and dictate terms which are not industry standard, and it's not ideal. So, the key thing is ask the question, have you invested in startups before? Should be yes. And the second thing is who, and can I speak to them, right? Who are the other companies that you've invested in? Because I've gone through lots of processes where the situation where an inexperienced investor promises the world and will force the startup to go down a path they should never have gone down, which can actually cause them to be crippled at their next funding round. If you do funding early stage right, you will find yourself getting to the next stage and the next stage. But you just got to make sure not to sort of be straight right at the beginning, because obviously as a startup, you're hungry for money, right? And if someone promises you a reasonable ticket of cash, you're going to be pretty excited and want to close that as quickly as possible. And it's the old kind of sort of putting the blinkers on so that you're very much focused on that money as opposed to what you should be doing properly.
Okay. So now this whole session is about investor readiness. So my question from all three of you is, in 5 points, if you can sum up what investor readiness is, and then we'll proceed with our questions. Lee?
From my side, understanding what investors or venture capital are looking for from a structure, okay? Because you might have a local company, which is perfectly fine, and maybe an early stage local investor might invest in that entity. But if you're planning to grow and scale and you're trying to look at international investment, at least even in your next round, the reality is you need to then get some advice around what's the ideal structure that is going to be acceptable to the vast majority of investors. So that's number one. The other one is making sure that you've got your documents in order. Don't wait and think that if I receive funds, I will then go clean up my business. The reality is there's often a condition before receiving funds that you have the right documents. So it could be a co-founders agreement, it could be a shareholders agreement, anything that kind of assists the structuring of your business. Make sure IP is sitting in the right place, because ultimately when people are investing in a company, they're investing in a structure that protects the investor's rights, but they are also ensuring that the IP that they're purchasing, the intellectual property that you are, as a team, is creating, is captured in the entity they're investing in, not a side entity that you once owned or one that's offshore that doesn't connect to your current company, right? That's a key part. You should always keep a basic data room going, a virtual data room, okay? Because this is something that trying to do it at the last minute is hard, because you have to then go through all your emails, all your process, try and find all these documents. Every sophisticated investor will send you a due diligence request list, and that request list is usually quite long. It's got a lot of questions, and if you're starting from scratch and you've never seen one before, you'll spend a lot of time filling that out. So it's very important that you have things saved properly and in the right structure. Also, just the other one is understand the costs and time of raising money, because a lot of people will leave themselves on the 11th hour to get money. So sometimes it's important to have the conversation with a lawyer or investor well before you plan to invest, get investment money, to understand what they expect from you. Because if they say, I want a trademark registered before we give you money, if they say they want your holding company structured in a particular way, all this costs money. So you need to allocate that cash before you get to that stage. Because what happens is you could sign a term sheet for $1 million that all these investors are going to pay you, but you won't see $1 of that $1 million unless you have structured or got all this in place. And often it's the chicken or the egg. You don't have the money to do it, but you can't get the money to do it. So it's a very difficult thing. So it's important. So they're the kind of things you need to look at as part of being investing ready.
Okay. Sidra?
To add on to what Lee said, I completely agree. And I would further add that you have a plan, you have a brilliant idea, but is the idea convincing enough financially to attract the investor? This is very important. From the investor's mindset, I can tell that no matter how great the idea is, but if you cannot materialize that idea, at the end of the day, it's worthless. So it is very important it is very important that your financial plan is very convincing to the investor.
So my next question is about a financial plan, but let's hear what Derek has to say.
Financial plans. Yeah, this is
Okay. Okay, so the financial plan is something. Yeah, please go ahead.
I just wanted to add to the last question, because Lee rounded it off incredibly well, and I really would advise and put out the building the foundations of your business is critical to moving forward and being investor ready. The legal side, the structure, having all your ducks in order essentially, but also there's a whole bunch of other parts, and that is part of your financials, making sure that your current financials are up to date and you understand them. And those financial forecasts are built on reality, from what you've got, the traction that you have, the clients that you're seeing that are paying. Before you get out there to be investor ready, it really is understanding how to communicate your problem and how to communicate your solution. What I find with a whole bunch of startup entrepreneurs, especially in the tech industry, is they are very, very keen to tell you about how they're building their technology. An investor, some investors are engineers and they might want to hear it, but the majority of investors that sit out there, they want to know how you're solving it and how easily you're solving it for people, not that you're using the greatest, latest bit of kit to solve the problem. And it's very important to focus on the investor, how he's going to make money through this whole thing. This is what his interest is. So, and then on to your financials, just to carry on with that. putting that financial plan together, I would say there's 2 points here. If you're not an expert, if you're not an accountant, I would suggest, highly recommend that you get someone to do this for you. One, because it's incredibly time consuming and it's really not your day job, your expertise. So find somebody that can just put that day-to-day stuff together and sit down with an expert when you are building your financial forecasts. One of the biggest errors that is a recurring error is the entrepreneur's trick of saying, if I attain this amount of the market, my market size is 1 gadillion people, I just need 1%, and we're going to make loads of money. It doesn't run. Nobody's interested in hearing that story. What you have to build into those financials is some real costs and how to grow to that market size, how much it's going to cost you to move forward. That's the reality. That's a real financial plan that someone sitting on the other side that's going to invest can get their teeth into and understand. Some fantasy and fictitious numbers just won't cut it.
Okay. So I think that was my next question, that, most of the startups fail to convince investors with their financial plan only. So what are the, what is a convincing financial plan, and what are the essentials of a convincing financial plan? So I believe Derek has already answered. Anything else that you would like to add to this, Derek, before we proceed with Lee and Sidra's answers?
So I'll jump in on this one.
Yeah.
So just one thing to note is, and I talk to a lot of startups who are raising external funding. One of the biggest things is the incredibly high valuation they come up with and what they will go to the market. And remember, sometimes when you talk to investors, you only get one go at this. So if you turn up and you're pre-product, pre-revenue, and you say my business is worth $10 million to an investor, right? You're not going to get a second go at this, because if you turn up 5 weeks later and say, sorry, I was wrong, it's 4 million, they're going to lose entire trust in you as a founder. The other thing that I see a lot as well is people will always want to show you the most amazing possible scenario that exists, which is you'll turn the website on or you turn your app on and everyone will just somehow discover it and it will come to you and everyone will just click their credit cards and keep buying the service. The reality is that doesn't happen. And so what's important that I've seen, and it has been successful, is show a very low scenario, an average and a high. Because a very low can be really, really pessimistic, i.e., I don't think I'm going to make many sales. Here's my costs. This is what I'm going to do. Here are my growth hacks. Here are the things I'm going to do without spending a lot of money. And then here's my high. And this is, if it is a high, this is what I'm going to do to hire some additional people to handle that volume. And if you give that spectrum, people then can take their own view as to where they believe you should sit in that spectrum on the financials. But as Derek pointed out, getting an expert who does this for a living is important, because there's plenty of Excel sheets floating around, and Excel is a blank canvas that you can make up whatever you want on it. So having an expert who does it in a form that is digestible by an investor who sees a lot of these regularly is important, because they're going to plug those numbers in, they're going to test them before they ever even remotely look at a term sheet to invest in your startup.
Sidra?
Yeah. So my add-on to this is, I think that most startups that I come across don't really justify the numbers that they put in the financial model. They have the great idea, everything is great, but then when we ask them, oh, why did you put this number, or what's the reason for this specific projection, they can't really justify it. So before you offer something to someone, you must understand it yourself. If you don't really understand your own business model, you will never be able to make the investor understand this. So this is the problem that we see, that we face, that when there is this questionnaire that we share on financial numbers, they really don't understand themselves. So yeah, again, both the panelists, they said it correctly, that if you really don't have the expertise, then hire the third-party person to make the financial model for you. You must be, enough to make that your qualitative aspects turn into the quantitative aspects.
So, Lee, you were mentioning about valuation, and since valuation is also mostly based on assumptions and uncertainty because it's mostly not in fixed numbers. So, what are the methodologies founders should use to value their startups? Any indicators, any methodologies that they should keep in mind?
To be honest, it's probably a question for Derek and Sid on this one. It's not, I don't get into the funding side. Ultimately, I see the clients come up with valuations, and I'm more the person who does the sniff test to say this sounds a bit too high. I don't know where this came from, but from the people that are actually doing the crunching and looking at investors, I think it's probably Derek and Sidra.
Okay, Derek, would you like to go first?
Okay. So there are various methodologies that can be used, like market multiples and a scorecard method. But the most common method is discounted cash flow method, where you can forecast your numbers and expected investment return rate, and then you come up with the valuation. So, but having said that, I think you can never evaluate startup accurately, because that startup is still at infancy stage, and you don't have the tangible product or the product that is already in the market. So you can never value accurately. But I think a discounted cash flow method is still much more appropriate for startups.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most popular methodologies out there. How much does a VC want to make? 20% a year. Okay, it's going to take me 5 years to attain my forecast number. Just discount it back, and I can raise this. All of these valuations at this stage for any entrepreneur, it really is blue sky valuations. And I think one of the things they should consider moreover is how much is it going to cost me to build this product and scale it to a certain level where, one, I can either bootstrap the business going forward, or two, I can do a follow-on round. What we often see from entrepreneurs is I don't want to give up 20%, 30% of my business, which for me is completely the wrong mentality. It's because if you don't give it up, you don't have a business. So at these early stages, you shouldn't really be too worried about the actual equity that you're giving up. You should be more worried about, can I employ enough people to get my product up and ready to the level that I need it to either bootstrap or move it forward with another investment round. And that should really be considered by entrepreneurs when they go into the market and sort of, I'm giving up my shares. You're not really.
Okay, so we have a question in our chat also, and my next question was also that interacting with investors for startups can be challenging and overwhelming at the same time. So what should founders or generally like co-founders and founders do to achieve better results and to overcome this fear that they have usually while interacting with the investors?
So what I would say is be prepared for, you've got to have quite thick skin. You're not going to start off and be amazing on the first time you're going to have the first conversation. So don't expect to get a home run the first time you hit the ball. You have to learn. You have to take on feedback, right? When VCs give feedback, they probably, again, Derek mentioned this and Sidra, in terms of, you see a lot of pitch decks, and you're going to be going through a lot of this information. They don't have the time, but when they tell you their feedback it's usually based on what others will think as well. So you've got to take that advice on, redirect, how are you going to pitch to the next person, so eventually you'll hit the mark. I think I see a lot of founders who are so set in their ways, in their view, whether it's backing their valuation, backing the forecasts, whatever it is that they're doing. The reality is they don't take that feedback on, and ultimately that makes it very, very hard to raise money. So I would say that preparation is the second one, just being prepared generally for all the answers. Sidra pointed that out, understanding when you've put something in a document, how are you backing that up? Derek mentioned the other point, which is talking about what is your market. So everyone says, well, my market is 5 billion people. It's everyone in the world that can touch a screen. Well, that's not a reality. And so it's being more realistic about what that market is and what's attainable within a particular budget. So I think they're the kind of things that you should be there. I would also say that educate yourself as a founder, and I come from it as a lawyer here, but as a founder, you need to understand the terminology. You need to understand what it is that they will be expecting you from you, and the more you know. Ultimately, remember, when investors invest in a business, they invest in the founding team with a concept idea, and they believe in the founding team to execute on that concept idea to create a really good business. So if they don't believe in the founders, even though it's the world's best idea, you probably will not get funded. Okay, so that's why you've really got to very much be a very educate yourself as a founder, be super impressive, and really know what you're doing and how you're going to execute on that idea.
I think Lee answered my next question as well, but let's just hear what Derek and Sidra has to say.
Yeah, sure. It's I don't envy these guys, having to stand up in front of investors and being young, being super passionate about your product, and then having to perform. But there are some things that you can install to make the process much easier. And we touched on that at the beginning, setting up the foundations of your business correctly and having all those things lined up and in place. That gives you the platform to actually start talking about your product without any questions coming back to you that you can't answer about how you've set it up. I think one of the critical things to look at as well is that founding team, and make sure it is complementary. Make sure that the guy that's standing up is actually the leader of that, making sure those skill sets have been diversified enough. No one's an expert in absolutely everything, so you've got to make sure you can answer all of those questions as well along the way. And again, there's a lot of traps out there. So speak about what you know. Don't start going off on tangents about what you don't know. You have a plan. We can only get from A to B. We can't go from A to Z in one go. So understand where you're actually heading. You can have a vision and a dream going forward, but you can't base a business on where you are today with some vision. So you've got to actually explain it correctly and understand it. When you're being asked these questions, don't try and answer them to please. If you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. If there is no answer, there is no answer. Don't get trapped in the moments of silence where you just keep on speaking and blurting out stuff that really isn't appropriate for that meeting. Every entrepreneur should know their business inside out and upside down, and just speak about those salient facts and be passionate and precise about what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve. You'll meet the right investors, and hopefully it will all match, and you'll be able to build your dream.
I absolutely agree with what Derek just said. That first you need to understand your thing, your work, and your business. And you don't always have to be very spontaneous with answering the investor's question. You can always say that, okay, I will do this, I will do some sort of research, and I will come back to you later on. Instead of giving the wrong answers, you can always prepare yourself for the right answer, and then later on you can share your answer.
Okay. So Derek, you mentioned about dream team. So what is a dream team? And how, since most of the VCs look for passionate and determined founders, but what about the whole team?
What about the whole team? I think it really is the sort of complementary role. Visionaries are intrinsically bad at detail. Engineers are intrinsically bad at being visionaries. So, a team that brings that skill set together, I think one of the most important things is there has to be a designated leader within that group. Whoever is the CEO has to be able to stand up, be accountable, and be the person that is the front man and speaks to investors. If you want to be that person, you're the guy that's responsible for raising capital for your company. And you're the one that's going to fall off if you don't. And there are great engineers out there, and they sit there and they can build products. There are great marketing guys out there. And I think it really is being able to display that you can have a team in place, that you can all communicate at the right level, and those egos are balanced fully, where the marketing and the sales guys can bring in their input from their feedback loops, bring that into the product development. And those guys will want to listen to it to make sure that the interactions that you're building and creating are correct and fit with that marketplace. And then that overall view, helicopter view of the business and how it's going to grow and how it's going to move on. I think that's the team everybody wants to see. There's some harmony within that team, not just one huge ego that's trying to conquer the world.
Lee?
Yeah, I was just going to say as well, I completely agree. The key thing is the founding team, your experience leading up to being a founder is important. And that doesn't mean that you can't be the Mark Zuckerberg or the Bill Gates of the world who you're still at university and you've been successful. Of course, that's possible as well. But if you do have a team that has got prior experience particularly in the area of the industry that you're doing your startup, that's super helpful, okay? Because therefore it shows industry knowledge, industry experience. Diversity is also an important one. It's hard, as Derek pointed out, if you have 3 developers, that might be fine if you're doing a very development heavy product and it's very much asset driven. But then who's your sales team? So then you have to think, well, do you hire a sales team? The reason why founding teams can be important is because founding teams are often incentivized through either their founding shares or a share incentive plan to stay, right? A lot of employees outside might last a year or 2 in a startup. They never, they don't always stay forever. And so that's why as an investor, you really want to know what's that core team, and is that core team going to be the one that takes it all the way? And so it's very important to match that team up properly. Interestingly, statistically, a lot of startups with more than one founder have a greater chance of investment. That doesn't mean that you can't be a single founder. It's just statistically that's how it's worked over time. So something to note.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you should have a perfect blend, not really perfect, but a good blend of the team. So if you have a guy who has the technological knowledge, then you must have a guy who is good with marketing. Then you must have a guy who has. So I think it's a team, or a founding team should be a good blend of individuals who are from diversified backgrounds. So they really they are the building blocks of the startup at the end of the day. So the team must be diversified. The second thing would be determination. I think there are a lot of good entrepreneurs. They have everything, but then their attitude is so that they're like, okay, if this startup works out, it works out, and if it doesn't work out, it's fine. So you must have that eagerness to make your idea accomplishable, and you want to really achieve that. You have that achievable goal in your mind. So I think the attitude and determination and the good blend of the team are the key areas.
Okay, so we have a few questions coming up on in our chat. But before that, what are we going to do is that we're going to promote these attendees to panelists so that they can talk to you not on chat, but here on Zoom. So, but before that, a very common question, what is a perfect pitch?
That would be the one where the investor takes his checkbook out and writes the check immediately, right? That pitch.
Yeah.
I don't actually think there is a perfect pitch. I think there's a very succinct pitch where the entrepreneur speaks fluidly. He goes through the problem. The investors can relate to that problem. He goes through. He tells them how he's going to solve that problem. They can relate to that. It makes a lot of sense to them. He goes through his market size, how he's going to approach that market, how he's going to do his go-to strategy, how he's going to build that product out. And it's a blend of 20, 30 minutes of running through a pitch deck, which is a story that culminates in a fantastic solution with a fantastic marketplace, and a perfect display of how that will gain traction and will become the product for that market. And it's just a very, in fact, it's the opposite of all the sort of passion and everything that we were talking about. It's just a very perfect blended speech or story that goes from start to end, that captivates and keeps the attention of the audience throughout, and every single part of it makes sense. At the end of that, as long as you don't say, I'm looking for $50 billion on a Godillion valuation, you should be okay. The valuation at the end has to be sensible as well. However well you've pitched, it has to be within the reality of your audience as well. And I think that's it. And the only bit of advice is, and I think we've all spoken about this, is to understand, build your foundations correctly, understand your product, understand your market, understand your strategy correctly. Stand there, practice, as if you were doing a school play. Stand in front of the mirror until you can just get through this whole thing in a very calm and beautiful way, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would just add that one of the things is with a startup, you wouldn't create a startup if you haven't identified a problem. But there's a million problems in the world at any one time, probably a lot more than a million. But the thing is, every single day you will come across a problem and you'll think, oh, great, that's a business idea. I'm going to create a startup. The reality is the problem big enough. So is it just my problem? So would I like a toothbrush without holding my toothbrush and just magically do that? That might be something I might want, but no one else in the world wants. So firstly, having a look at that. So even if it's a problem that, let's just say that you're in a particular industry that I have no idea about, like it might be it might be in sort of agriculture or something like that. You need to talk to me and say, here is a problem and here is a use case of how this was solving someone's problem. So going that next stage saying, this person's a farmer, this is what they do. This farmer is the same as 100 farmers, right? And this is how this problem solves their problem. And these farmers are one of this certain amount of farming area that happens to be millions and millions of farmers that all could have their problem solved by this thing. So now I'm related, I can relate to the problem, even though I'm not a farmer or not in agriculture. And then I'm like, okay, now you've brought me in. Now let's talk about how your product is actually priced and what your model is. Another thing that's interesting is, 97% of startups that raise money, raise it on an existing business model that's known to investors. Okay, so when you hear things like I am the Uber of trucks or I'm the Airbnb of warehousing, right? They use terms now as a business model. So when you're doing this, it's very, very difficult. And I'm sure it was very difficult for Uber and very difficult for Airbnb when the first time they pitched, when no one understood how that business model was going to work. But the point being is, as soon as you say that, in your mind, you know exactly how that business model works and how you make your money. Okay, so it clicks people straight away into going, okay, I understand. Just like the old days of knowing what a SaaS was. When people got to know what SaaS was, they understood what SaaS was and how you make your money. So, using those examples of saying, we are similar business model to this would be helpful as part of your pitch as well.
Sidra?
Yeah. So I think there is the common problem that we come across whenever we encounter any pitch deck. There is no flow of the pitch deck. I mean, things are very scattered. There is there is team, there is the problem, there is the solution, but there is no flow. So first, whenever you go to any investor to present your pitch deck, you must first identify the flow. Okay, so how it goes? There is a problem. Okay, this is my solution. This is my target market. This is my team who will execute, and this is how much we want. So there must be a flow, and then the flow should be in such a way that it's convincing to the investor, and it is it is simplified. It's sometimes we get the pitch decks and without having a call with the founding team, we can't really understand what the business is or what the product is. So I think it should be very crisp. It should be very to the point, and there are things that that can make the pitch deck very interesting. You can add the current standing of your business, then the corporate social responsibility is something, or the perspective on the society is something that now everyone is concerned about. So there are things that you can add on, but then the basic elements should be there, which is the problem, the solution, the team, and how much you are asking for.
Okay. So we've promoted a few attendees to panelists for Q&A. So I can see Hamza Mateen. Hamza, would you like to go first? Or
oh yes. Hi everyone. Nice to see everyone here. Okay, my name is Hamza Mateen. I'm the former president of Pasha, and also heading a forum called Apex, which is Entrepreneurs Exchange. We're just wondering that there are a lot of VCs and investors are popping up in Pakistan, and they lack proper experience in managing interaction with founders. And I see they are misusing that information and they're not honoring NDAs. I think a lot of education on both sides, from the startup sides and also from the VC sides, is needed in this growing up market, so they can really use that information in a proper way and honor their NDAs. What is the international experience from our partners here who are has such a good experience working globally? Can they shed some light on it?
Thanks, Hamza. I'll step in. It's not actually a unique thing to Pakistan. It's quite global. The reality of it is, I advise all my startups that the best confidentiality agreement, or NDA, is not the document, but actually how much information you share. Okay, so the reality is that if I wanted to know, it'd be like being KFC or something, and you're saying, here's how I make my chicken burger, but by the way, here is how my special herbs and spices are. The reality is you don't need to give that extra information. You don't need to explain, here is the contract that I get my supplier from a factory to get my $20 items. If you give that away, it's way too much information. The reality is that most investors will want to see, obviously, the cash flow forecast, maybe your accounts, maybe your high-level business plan, right, and certain other levels, but they just really, really restrict how much information you give out. Because this comes back to my original point earlier in the session, which is there are a lot of investors who might be doing this as a bit of a shopping exercise to understand a particular market, to see where everyone is at, so they can pick the winner or to pick the best one out of multiple, and then know how their investment in that particular entity is going to be able to be escalated by having inside information. So again, be restrictive as to what you give.
Because the only thing missing from the investor side is the knowledge about the industry, actually. And that information is coming from founders. So they really need to honor that. And there has to be an ironclad agreement which should be executed and passed on to founders. And that's more related to people like NIC, which should propagate that experience and the knowledge to the founders, so they're careful when passing on information.
Yeah, and just one thing to note, Hamza. So in startup world, it's basically a race to the end. It's a race to market share. So I'll give you an example. Kareem, which I think is also in Pakistan, right? That wasn't their idea. That's Uber's idea, right? And they got sold for billions of dollars. Now, what did they do? They took the idea and they massively raised money very, very quickly, and they expanded as fast as they could, faster than Uber could, until such time as they were an acquisition target. The reality is, unless you were inventing the next 7G mobile network, then you should get a patent and you should keep it really under wraps and keep it very secret, right? And be protected by law. But the fact of the matter is, an idea is not actually something you can protect. All you can do is market and actually develop it and get market share on that idea. Okay, to the extent you can.
Yeah, normally an idea in 6 months is already lost. That's true globally. But here, IP laws and intellectual property and things like that are not implemented, although they are in the law, but they're not implemented in intellectual spirit. So there are a lot of loopholes, even in agreements, where you can bypass them. So that is, I think, will come with the majority of the industry, I guess. People will know which are the players are honorable players, which are credible players.
Yeah, and just
Okay,
just to
so
wrap that
actually,
up,
sorry,
litigation's expensive.
please go ahead, and then we'll move
And
to
I was
that.
just going to just wrap this up by one thing. Litigation is expensive. Okay, so unless you're a large organization to litigate on your rights, doesn't matter how great your contracts are. Your contract is a starting point to litigation. So again, it comes back to the point that let's just say that you're the successful player in your industry, and you get to a Series B, and you've raised $20 million. That first $500,000 can be used to sue everyone who's stolen your ideas, right? But the thing is, you have to still have a document to prove that the idea was either incorrectly used or that the IP was owned by you. So I say to a lot of people, when you sign an IP assignment agreement early on, even though right now it probably doesn't, it's not worth anything, it is worth something when you're about to IPO, a very good idea, because they'll look back all the way in the history and they'll be saying, that person developed that great idea in your product, and that's valuable. We need to know that it's actually owned by the company. And that document you sign very early on will tick that box, right? It'll give the ability to be able to protect the interest of the investors. Okay, so I know it's hard and I know it's difficult, and being a startup is difficult from a legal perspective. So protect your information as best you can, right? And just try to grow market share. You can't, it's very hard to compete when someone's already grown quite large.
Yes, definitely. Good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Hamza Saab. Okay, so Dr. Adnan, are you here? Okay, good. Your mic is off.
Apologies for that. Thank you very much, Sana. Yes, my name is Adnan Niazi, and I'm the founder of Novus Altair Limited. We are based in UK, but we are a startup there in Pakistan also. So my specific question to the panelist would be, for the startups like ourselves working from various different geographical locations where we have the backing and the support and the history of our earnings and the credible records, but on another location where we are trying to establish ourselves from scratch. How viable is it for a startup like ourselves to rely on our historical background and earnings and the historical valuation method, whereas the organization itself in Pakistan, for example, will be a completely new organization and will not be able to provide any stake in the overseas business of the organization? And what are the challenges in taking this sort of approach? Of course, there are advantages that we would like to rely on in terms of our track record and the historical background. Any one of the panelists, Lee or Derek, especially?
Yeah, happy to jump in. So just so I understand, you have a UK business with a track record, and you're establishing the same business in Pakistan. One question: Why wouldn't you do it underneath the holding company of the UK?
Yeah, that would be the holding company, but of course the business itself in the UK is pretty well established, and we are able to support that business independently. However, we would like to establish a new startup company in Pakistan with the brand name as well, with the investment and the bootstrapping investment from the sponsor company already being injected into the new startup already. However, we would like to verticalize the operation itself as a new startup in Pakistan and attract new investment for the new organization in Pakistan with innovative products which are not currently part of the UK operations.
Okay, I think this really comes down to the part that we when we were talking about founders. You've got an awful lot that you can leverage on here. I understand it's a completely new company, but all that experience around it and what you're bringing to the table. I think the biggest kickback you'll be getting from the investment community will be to try and understand why you want to disseminate the two entities and why you don't want to build them up. A million reasons I'm sure you have, but that will be something that comes along for sure. In terms of raising capital for the new entity, if it's doing something outside of the remit of the UK company, and you bring that expertise along, you are starting at the very beginning of the journey. So, and raising capital for this, you're starting very much at the beginning of the journey, with just bringing a lot of experience to the table. If there would be a way of bringing it underneath the UK company, I think you'd be much further along the line, and you'd be approaching a later stage investment round, which could help you with growth capital rather than startup capital.
Just, I'll also step in as well. Adnan, one thing you'll note is when a company that's established decides to create essentially a sort of an innovative arm of their business, the most important thing you need to be aware of is that investors want to ensure that they are not funding a business that has leakage, right, back to the other company. So if they have to stand on their own, it's great that you've been able to incubate the concept of the idea. The other thing is it's also very, very difficult for corporate founders to exist. So you might own 100% of the Pakistani entity and then you'll get investment. But the reality is the way that venture capital works is, again, you're investing in a team, not a company. Because if the UK company goes into liquidation and I've put 30% of investment in your Pakistani entity, what happens then? The reality is perhaps it'll just cripple. The whole thing will be a deck of cards and will fall down. So you need to consider who's the team that become the founding team. And it could be the original shareholders. It could be a new team that will do that. But you need to be able to separate the two worlds and ensure that there's no crossover. And I speak from experience because Clara, my company that raised $3 million on a safe note, we were a law firm. And we realized in order to scale to help more startups, we needed to use technology. And so we incubated the idea in the law firm and we pushed it out. But I know when we did that, investors were very keen to ensure that we were not benefiting our law firm by doing this and that it was standalone and that our efforts were dedicated to the entity in which they were investing.
Thank you very much. Thank you, both of you. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're going to take 2 more questions because we are almost done with our session timings. Saad, Mirza Saad Beg. Saad, do you have a question for our panelists? Okay, not sure he's here. Habib Furkan. Okay, there is a question in the chat, how to get coaching for investor readiness step by step. Okay, Ehsan Khan.
Yeah, hi.
Ehsan Saab, are you? Yeah.
Hi. So you just made me Johnny on the spot, out there with that. I was in the middle of typing another WhatsApp message, but I think great insights from Lee and Derek and all the presenters. I think so. I'll just tell you my background. So I'm an investor, co-founder in, I don't know if there is such a thing, but I have put in some money into a startup, and we're trying to get it off. It's fresh produce e-commerce, uh, particularly in the largest city of Pakistan. But we also were thinking, I mean, what is it? And we're making financial, doing that financial due diligence. So I'll take Derek's advice, and we will get a financial accountant or financial advisor to look at our cash flows and our sales, and then project accurate forecast, because we're going for some investment rounds. But so is there any, from what I've understood, don't aim too high, be realistic. And obviously, like I think it was Derek or Lee, there are a million problems to be solved at one given time. So I think we just have to keep it real. It's not that don't ask for too much so that you don't get another shot at it. I mean, I think the key to success is start small, take some baby steps, get some small seed funding, and then build it from there. I think that's the approach from what I could ascertain from your talk. That's all from my side. No questions, just my comments.
Yeah, so I'd say, yep, I would confirm that that's true. One thing to note, remember that the whole battle of the founding raising money is the founder obviously wants the highest valuation possible, right? Because it's less dilution for them, and then the investors want the lowest, and so there's always that battle. But again, it's coming into being realistic, because if you can't justify it, then what ends up happening is that you'll end up having a down round. And so the down round means that if you go in and say, I'm worth $8 million, and some people actually agree with you and they invest money at $8 million, and then you find yourself in the next round actually being only $5 million, then that's a down round, which means that the original investors will lose money. And as Derek pointed out, in terms of how a lot of investors will plan for this in terms of what their return on investment is, that's not a great start. So I think it's important for you guys just to sort of remember that. There was also another question there. Sorry, I'll just jump in just in terms of convertible note or equity. This is a really important one. We are generally always for convertible notes under $1 million if you can do it, and if the investors are happy with that. Largely because it's faster, and in very early stage investment, it's very, very difficult to value your business. So a cap can be useful. Again, I don't know what it's like at the moment on the ground in terms of Pakistan, but I know for a lot of other regions that convertible notes are a sought after way to go. Equity is just a little bit more expensive and a little bit longer in terms of closing the round, because with equity, remember, you need a shareholders agreement, you need a subscription agreement, you need to add the shareholders to your company, right, which costs money. You need to do a proper due diligence, you need to create a board, you need to do disclosure letters. So there's a lot of stages to it. And just as an example, like on average, it's taking about 3 months to close a decent equity round. So it's just something to think about. So when you're raising $100,000 and you want to do it an equity round, just remember time versus money, and just know the difference between the two.
Okay. So it's almost 4 p.m., but one last question from Saad Athar. Saad, so you have 30 seconds to ask your question so that then we can wrap it up.
Okay, I'll go very quickly. I just want to introduce first that I'm already a startup, and I did a boot camp recently, and out of the 200, my group was my startup was selected as a part of for seed funding. Now, the different problems which I faced during that, and maybe Sidra can relate to it, is that it's very difficult to get the confidence of the person taking out the checkbook, like Derek mentioned earlier, because of the cultural issues over here. The quick question is, how do you guys see having a non-executive director as part of our board, because what I see in Pakistan or maybe in other places as well is that you might have to win the get your idea won by some known people, even if they're paying in money or not, and then maybe sit with them and take, whenever you go and pitch somewhere and you tell them that, look, these people are already with me on board. You think these kind of things would work in the type of market we are operating? I've done it I've done one startup earlier. Now this is my second one. And the first one also had the same problem which we faced, but then it was from Dubai. We got it raised up. I actually belong to the UK, but I'm trying to, put my things over here in Pakistan. So just a quick one on NAD, please.
I'll just say from a legal perspective, when you talk about directors, the problem with having directors is that it usually requires an additional step, right? So they're actually, you've got to add them to your company. They're actually on your articles as a director. There's fiduciary duties. What we generally find is it's better to have an advisory panel. So if you want people to draw upon their experience, get them as an advisory panel. Now, if they're very, very sought after, then there are options to be able to give them a very small percentage of your equity vested over 4 years based on a very clear objective around how much effort and work they're giving you back, right? You need to be very clear if you're going to do that. Not everyone asks for equity. Some people just might believe in you and they might be, a seasoned, experienced person in the industry and they're happy to support you. That's great as well. But still put it as an advisory agreement, have them as advisory panel, and you'll see them in a lot of startups. Advisory panels are often people that give credibility to your startup, and it is sought after. It does help.
Thank you.
So we still have a lot of questions. So I think what we can do is that Derek, Lee, and Sidra, maybe we can collect all of these questions and email these to you guys. And maybe if you have time, you can answer these questions and then we can share it with the startups that are here and we couldn't take their questions, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah. I would love to answer those questions. So I think there are some interesting questions, but because we are short of time, so we can't really.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, but you can definitely share the questions with us and at least with me.
Sure.
And
Sure. So I think before we wrap up and end this session, I would like to thank Lee, Derek, and Sidra, and most importantly, Neil and Poppy, who've been working with me for the last 2-3 days to arrange this session. And thank you so much, guys. And hopefully we'll be interacting more in coming future, and would have someone from your teams for the main event, which is happening on the 5th of March. So before we end, there is a common practice that we all do is turn on our cameras and take a good photo before we end the session. So if you guys can just do that, turn on your cameras and maybe a thumbs up.
2 thumbs up for today's session.
Okay, 2 thumbs up. So Asfar, we cannot see you.
You cannot see me?
No.
Wow. Might be some error. I have opened my camera. Is it working now?
Okay.
We can see you. I think we can see you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank you, everyone.
all should smile and maybe a thumbs up.
Yeah.
All right. Daniel, please let us know when.
I like Derek's thumbs up.
I have a lot of thumbs.
Great.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you.